Thank you very much, Scarlett. Now, we are talking about the use of New Zealand coal to keep our electricity network stable. Joining us now is Patrick Phelps. He is someone who knows a fair bit about coal. He's the manager of Minerals West Coast, a group representing the mining industry on the West Coast, and he joins us now. Patrick, good afternoon.
Well, good afternoon to you all.
Patrick, how shaky is our grid? Why do we need to have this huge coal stockpile in Huntly?
Well, as a lot of people take a point of national pride in, you alluded to it before, we've got quite a substantial hydro fleet around the country. We've got geothermal, we've got wind, but even over the last 10 years, as we've become ever more renewable and looking at the figures for the previous decade, generated anywhere between 80 to 88% of our electricity from renewables. There's a balance there of anywhere between 10 and 20% that's not available from renewables, and you've got to fill that gap. Just as each of us needs 1% of the oxygen that we breathe, we need every percentage of electricity that we generate and use, and when that's not renewables, it has to be some combination of natural gas and coal.
And why Indonesian coal? Do we not dig this kind of coal up in New Zealand?
This is a question I get a lot. So I guess first things first is to just get some sense of scale. New Zealand's coal industry as it is today produces anywhere between 2 and 3 million tonnes of coal per year. At the highest, I think New Zealand's production's ever been, we might have produced about 5 million tonnes a year back when there was more abundant low-cost coal in Waikato, as well as some other factors. So if you sort of work off that figure of anywhere between 2 to 3 million now and our peak production ever having been 5 million tonnes a year, Indonesia exports, not producers, exports more than 500 million tonnes of coal internationally every single year, and that's thermal coal for use in electricity generation or possibly direct heat in some boilers, but 500 million tonnes of coal each year. And so that's one bit of the context. Another bit of context is that in New Zealand, the demand for that coal is largely, not exclusively, but largely in the electricity sector, where some years Genesis Energy may find that there's enough demand to justify burning 200,000 to 300,000 tonnes of coal a year. Other years, if the lake levels are low or potentially gas levels, gas production's low, it might burn more than 1 million tonnes of coal a year. So that volatility is quite substantial for a New Zealand industry that already has a lot of customers. And, some of the coal that we produce isn't used for generating electricity, it's used for making steel, and so it's exported to steel producers. And so that volatility is a big factor. And then you just have to come to the conclusion that, well, as far as Genesis is concerned, for the cost that they're willing to pay and the price that producers out of Indonesia can supply it, it's clearly just quite competitive for them to get it offshore.
Right. And you mentioned natural gas there. How does that factor into this whole instability in the power system in New Zealand?
Yeah, so of the two fossil fuels that we've got, in more ways than one, natural gas has generally been preferable, in part because people like to say, it's less emissions intensive, it's, a transition fuel or whatever. It certainly seems to be more palatable for some people than what coal does. But if you go back to sort of 2017, 2018, New Zealand was producing close to 200 petajoules of gas each year, somewhere about 180 to 190. Now, as of this year, we're down to producing 106 petajoules. Now, a petajoule is just a unit of energy. It works out to about 28 litres of petrol. But if you just accept the fact that our gas production has pretty much halved over the last 7 years, and over the next 5 years, we're going to be down to about 66 petajoules. So our gas production is down and on a trajectory to continue falling. And so if you've got a need for fossil fuels to firm up the grid, coal is the most logical choice.
So as that gas production decreases, we're going to have an increase in coal importing.
Oh, that would be my guess, yes. I mean, there has been talk of liquefied natural gas imports into New Zealand. How cost-effective or likely that is, I'm not sure. But in the meantime, I mean, coal's a pretty simple fuel. You can use it and abuse it to your heart's content. You can cart it around on a truck. You can leave it in the rain. It's, you don't have to keep it in bottles like gas. It's not like electricity that has to run down lines. So yeah, it's a solid transportable fuel that's easy to store just in a large pile of up to 600,000 tonnes, obviously, as far as these electricity companies are concerned.
So are there policy hurdles that have been put in the way of coal producers and mining companies, or is it more the fact that the market value that they can get from opening up a new coal mine just isn't what it used to be?
I would say it's definitely a bit of both. I mean, I heard one of your callers say earlier, once in the good old days, all of these coal mines were owned and operated by the state, up to a point where Solid Energy went broke under the government's management and then had to be sold off for, in its various parts. And so there were coal mines running in the Waikato, like Huntly Underground and the likes. And as far as I can recall, when Solid Energy was broken up into, its parts and sold off, there were about 3 or 4 coal mining companies that bought what were going concerns, and then there were other, so-called assets that were not taken on because presumably they weren't viable, and I imagine that was the case for Huntly Underground. But, yeah, it's hard to do anything in this country, as anyone who ever tries to do anything knows, whether that's building a house, whether that's trying to set up a hydro scheme on the west coast of the South Island, and mining's no exception. But I think all of those renewables are under the same constraints. There was an attempt at a solar farm down in the Mackenzie country a year or two ago, and that got stuck in the consenting process as well. But yes, certainly there are a lot of regulatory hurdles to more coal production in this country than otherwise might be the case, because a boggy paddock with a few tussocks growing in it can be considered a wetland, and so that can make it quite difficult if you want to dig it up to get the coal that's underneath it. I'd say that there's a whole heap of different factors at play, but coal production in this country could be higher than it otherwise is.
We're talking to Patrick Phelps, Minerals West Coast Manager. What do you say to people like the lady that we've all just heard on the news who was saying every tonne of coal that is burnt leads to the crazy weather and events like the Canterbury wildfires that we're experiencing?
Every unit of fossil into the atmosphere, we measure it in tonnes of carbon dioxide and contributes to climate change. Coal's no exception, but nor are our diesel and petrol that we use for transport, nor of the jet engines that bring international travellers here. I think it's still upwards of 80 or 90% of all of the world's energy comes from fossil fuels, the balance coming from renewables and nuclear. So, yeah, coal makes a contribution, but what I would say to that as well is that in New Zealand, of all of our fossil fuels, oil for transport, gas and coal, because we don't use as much of that as we use of other fuels, it's the minority of our carbon dioxide emissions. But ultimately, Genesis is using coal. They have revenue. They have got the ability to borrow money. If they thought the best bet was to just go and build a whole heap of solar farms or go and build a whole heap of wind farms, that's what they'd be doing. There's clearly a demand in the market to keep a fossil fuel plant going in our electricity generation portfolio.
So what would you like to see happen, in the short, medium and long term in terms of coal usage in New Zealand and just power generation in New Zealand in general?
I'd get rid of all of the other energy sources and just use coal for everything. Go back to steam trains, No, I'm joking. We would.
What a time.
I tell you what, I do miss the smell of, growing up in Dunedin, I do miss the smell of coal that used to, when I was walking back from footy practice.
No, I was just going to say that I think in the main we've got to make it easy to do a lot of things in New Zealand, including electricity generation. I still live on the west coast. I was born and raised here, and in my lifetime I've seen 2 attempts at reasonably large hydro projects that would have, they wouldn't have got rid of all fossil fuels, but they would have shifted the needle in terms of our supply. They've both got held up in that process, and the same is true for pretty much every other renewable asset that you could attempt to build. So I think making it easy to do everything is quite important. I think repealing the oil and gas ban was, I think, quite a good move because it gives us more options. But if there's more gas out there, it's going to take a while to be found and come online. In the meantime, I think making it easier to produce coal in this country, but still just being willing to live with the fact that just like anything else we can't produce enough of or produce cheaply enough in New Zealand, we're probably going to have to live with imports. And bear in mind, we export goods all over the world. We import things we don't need. We live in a global economy, and I think that that's a good thing. We've actually, funnily enough, got a trade surplus with Indonesia, because they consume a lot of our meat and dairy products, which are produced with coal in a slightly convoluted way. So, and I do think at some stage New Zealand, look, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but I do think at some stage being open-minded to some form of nuclear generation in New Zealand is something that I think people should consider, because after hydro, it's the world's largest source of low emissions energy.
All right, so let's get some nuclear power going. Let's find a river to dam, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and just steam trains and steamships, I think, if you didn't miss that last bit. But yeah.
Love it. Patrick, really good to catch up. Go well, and we'll talk again soon.
Bring back the traction engines on our farms.
That is Patrick Phelps, the manager of Minerals West Coast. It is 10 to 2.